Hi, I am Dr. Stephen Stosny, and thank you for joining us for our new download course, Soaring Love, How to Turn Feelings of Love into Enduring Adult Relationships. Now, if you've been to couples counseling, it's probably helped you and your partner make better conscious choices. The trouble is, conscious choices play only a small part in the routine of daily living. Over 50% of routine behaviors are habit. They run on autopilot, circumventing what you learned in couples counseling. So you can have all kinds of insight, learn skills, really know how to do it in the therapist's office. But once you get back in the routine and you get all these triggers for habits that most of which you're not even aware of, you drop back into the old habits of relating. Habits are the default processing of the brain. They're measured in milliseconds. That's thousands of times faster than conscious decision. So if you're going to rely on conscious decision to change behavior on a consistent basis, it's usually going to be too little too late. Conscious decision can serve as manual override. It can stop the habit from playing out. But it takes a lot of mental energy to stop a habit once it's activated. And this is what it would look like. Hey, I'm stonewalling. It's just a habit, but I really want to hear what you have to say. It's really hard to do that once the habit of stonewalling's been triggered, and that's because negative habits in relationships are powered by adrenaline, which is a powerful hormone stimulant. Adrenaline powers habits of criticism, defensiveness, stonewalling, and contempt. You need adrenaline to do those because they're actually violating deeper values. Whenever you violate a deeper value, you need adrenaline to overcome the natural inhibition. And those, by the way, are what John Gottman calls the four horsemen of the apocalypse: criticism, defensiveness, stonewalling, and contempt. And they predict divorce in over 90% of the cases. Now, once the habit gets activated, adrenaline keeps you stuck in it. So you get it activated, and it's really hard to stop that. What you have to do is develop habits that automatically stop it. Consciously, it's very difficult to stop. But once it does get activated, it's the adrenaline that really keeps you stuck. Now, the brain loves habits because they conserve energy. The difference between a habit and the same behavior consciously decided is hundreds of millions of multi-firing neurons. So if I just do something by habit, like pick up my glasses, it'll be hundreds of millions of neurons less firing than if I decide, where are my glasses? Let me put them on. Now, under stress, habits rule. All animals retreat to previously acquired habits under stress when physiological demands drain resources from conscious mental processing. So it's not just humans. All animals will retreat to previously learned habits under stress. Also, under stress, habits never die. And there was a, there was a classic experiment where, and I actually replicated this when I was in graduate school, where you took baby rats and taught them to run a very complicated maze, and then didn't put them in that maze again until near the end of their lives, when they were very old, about 2 years later. And they didn't remember it at first, but once you started shocking them, put them under stress, in other words, it came back to them, and they remembered how to get out. So under stress, and running mazes is habituated for rats. They do it automatically. Under stress, habits never die. Now, once formed, habits can be changed only by forming new habits to replace them. Lasting change in relationships requires developing new habits that are incompatible with the ones you don't want, because you can't undo those habits. So you have to have those habits trigger new habits that are incompatible with them. And that's what this looks like. A habit of criticism. If you're in the habit of criticizing, and people usually form those habits pretty early in life. They can be changed only by developing a habit of compassionate assertiveness. Now, criticism is when you're pointing out something wrong with the behavior of someone else. But in a love relationship, once criticism becomes chronic, it becomes more about the character of the partner, and that's why it predicts divorce. It's not behavior specific after a while. It might start out that way, but it doesn't stay that way. Now, compassionate assertiveness is when you stand up for your rights and privileges, but you do it in a way that respects the rights and privileges of your partner and is sympathetic to his or her vulnerabilities. So you don't, if they have a shame vulnerability, you don't make them ashamed. If they have fear of isolation, you're not rejecting in the way you do it. So you're compassionate to their vulnerabilities while standing up for your own rights and privileges. Now, two kinds of habits cause problems in love relationships. That's personal habits of emotion regulation. Those are coping mechanisms that go as far back as toddlerhood. So we all have habits of emotion regulation, and the worst ones, which we'll get to a little bit later, originate when you're 2 years old, really. And interactive habits, that's how partners respond to negative emotions in each other. And those are mostly formed in the first years of living together. So personal habits of emotional regulation and interactive habits, they both have to be regulated for a happy relationship. Now here is the curse of interactive habits in intimate relationships: adaptation. The brain adapts to environmental conditions over time. The initial emotional response to a new circumstance is always attenuated by familiarity. That's how the good becomes boring. That's the curse of love relationships. Once you get used to something good, it gets less good. It's novelty that stimulates interest. So what that means is biologically, you're not going to stay interested in your partner. You have to do it psychologically and based on your values. And in most environments, adaptation is how the bad becomes bearable. That's how people adapt to prison, concentration camps, any kind of horrific conditions. In fact, in prison, the suicide watch is usually just the first 48 hours. Once they adapt to it, they become lower risk of suicide. In intimate relationships, this is the exception. The bad tends to get worse, and that's due to the adrenaline effect. Adrenaline gives the temporary energy and confidence required to respond negatively to loved ones. And again, you need that because devaluing a loved one or responding negatively to a loved one violates a deeper value. The adrenaline effect is subject to tolerance. In other words, it's like any other amphetamine. You build a tolerance to it, and it takes more and more adrenaline to get temporary energy and confidence. I have to devalue you more and more to get the same level of empowerment from adrenaline. So I might devalue you very mildly, a subtle criticism the first time, and that adrenaline makes me feel more confident, gives me more energy. But the next time I'm going to have to devalue you more to get that same level of energy and confidence. So the bad in most environments gets bearable. In love relationships, the bad gets worse. Now, soaring love forges new personal and interactive habits to build a relationship based on desire rather than emotional need, support rather than demands, enduring values rather than temporary feelings. In part one of the course, we'll see why it's so easy to love in the wrong part of the brain. In part two, we'll see how to build soaring love in the profoundest part of the brain.